tell to the men and women of the Bell system really begins on September 19th, 1938. On that day, an ominous signal appeared along America's eastern coast, a signal that brought fear and consternation, for it meant hurricane coming. As the news was spread of the dreaded storm sweeping toward our shores from the tropic seas, men called upon bitter experiences of the past for guidance and began desperately to prepare in every way known to them. And throughout the threatened states there was the feeling of a grave danger escaped when the center of the storm was found to be traveling north and was expected to take a normal course to the northeast. On the morning of September 21st, however, it unaccountably changed its direction and headed straight for the most densely populated section of the United States, straight toward an area crowded with cities of the greatest importance in the nation's industrial life, crowded with thousands of rural communities loved for their beauty and serenity ever since the beginning of America's colonial history, straight toward harbors sheltering thousands of watercraft, toward coast resorts known throughout the world, toward famous beaches, summer playgrounds for millions. To serve this great area of our country, there is, of course, a vast network of telephone services, spreading the voice of cities in countless directions, penetrating to remote mountain hamlets or shore communities far off the beaten track of travel, turning a state, a nation, into a neighborhood. You Bell System people need no description of the character and extent of the telephone facilities at which nature was aiming her tremendous powers of destruction. It was 2:45 p.m. on September 21st that the hurricane first struck the shores of Long Island and the beaches extending across Rhode Island and eastward to Cape Cod. And then it plowed its wide and savage path through thousands of square miles in 6 New England states and on into Canada until it lost its fury in the far north. Unforgettable ruin and destruction was the record of its swift and terrible passage. With wind velocities of frightful power, it wiped out entire shore communities in its raging path and created waves of immeasurable force that then swept the shores clean of buildings that had already withstood the blows of the gale. Beaches that only a few weeks earlier had harbored countless vacationists and rung with the laughter of happy children were a shambles. Long stretches of coast were almost unrecognizable, for the houses marking them had been leveled by wind and wave, reduced almost to splinters. Such was the destructive power of the surging water action on Long Island to greet the telephone crews that began moving in even before the wind stopped blowing. Miles of cable washed out or hurled to the water-soaked ground. Miles of wire with poles littering the roads and highways. Bridges gone. Roads well nigh impassable. 30,000 telephones silent to challenge the Long Island men. Nor was that challenge the only one that brought out New York crews. For the hurricane's fringe, lashing the eastern part of the state, had caused fearful havoc. In an area stretching 100 miles north from the nation's great metropolis, there was wire down, roads to clear, and nearly 15,000 telephones to put back into service there. And in New Jersey, too, was another challenge of destruction. Her shores had been battered by the seas. Gales had leveled houses, trees, and pole lines. Over 300 cables in trouble. 23,000 lines to restore. 35,000 telephones out of service. That was the challenge to the Jersey men. And now what of New England? What was the challenge there after the hurricane's frightful force had wrought such destruction as never before had been experienced? This motion picture scrapbook will make that challenge very clear to any audience of telephone people. Probably it is only such an audience, familiar with the details and technique of restoring service, that can fully comprehend the problems to be met and solved in bringing order out of utter chaos on a vast terrain. in restoring service to 410,000 telephones that were silent in great cities, tiny hamlets, and isolated farms through the New England states. Only telephone workers whose labors are so tightly geared with the daily needs of city and country can realize the shock to communities made voiceless by fallen wires. You best can understand the significance of broken channels for long-distance communication when tragic news has set faraway voices calling, calling, calling. You best can visualize behind-the-scenes activity at test boards, where skilled men work devotedly to join circuits still alive, so that wire detours may be arranged, and there may be talk once more. And so, as these scenes parade before you on the screen, you cable men will know, best of all, the meaning of thousands of cable breaks and the splicing job ahead. You linemen can best compute the poles to set and climb and the miles of wire to string. Installers, you best can estimate the individual tasks a hurricane can give to men who use your tools. And operators, you will know as no one else will know what hundreds of New England central offices experienced in communities that reeled and staggered from shock and wounds. Yes, it was a Herculean job that challenged the forces of New England's telephone organization and the men of the long lines, in whose special care is the functioning of the longer intercity circuits. And the answer was positive and swift. Construction and maintenance men from all 6 states were mobilized. Former employees with the necessary experience were located and called back, for the appalling task of repair and reconstruction needed every available pair of hands, every car, every truck. Because of its very vastness, the job was an unparalleled test of teamwork, unity of purpose, courage, sacrifice, ingenuity. And for an example of ingenuity, let us watch some action at Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. One of New England's roaring rivers had smashed another bridge. An important long-distance cable had gone with it. How will this situation be met? Watch the Coast Guard officer brought to the scene in an airplane by the resourceful telephone men. Watch the cannon that came with him, made for the very purpose of throwing lifelines in Coast Guard service. And there goes another kind of lifeline over the river, so that rope and wire and cable strand can follow, and then the cable itself to bridge the gap the Storm King had imposed. If ever telephone people had their hands full, this was the time. So vast was the damage and so unprecedented its character. It was obvious at once that more men still could be used, more speed attained, and so a call was heard. Could New Jersey spare some crews? It could indeed. Here they come. No, there they go, over the Hudson River, headed east. What about the telephone neighbors over in New York? Right away was the answer. We can take care of our own troubles and still send trucks and men. They leave in an hour. How about Pennsylvania? Okay, was the swift response. Of course we'll help, just as they helped us when the floods were here. Let's roll, said faraway long lines men climbing over the slopes of the Alleghenies. Let's roll, said Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia. We'll sleep later. Keep rolling, said Ohio. We owe them for that sleet storm help. And rolling east came special trains with men and tools and trucks and cars. They rolled on special schedules from Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota. And soon reinforcements of 2,400 men with 600 cars and trucks had moved into the battle line to lend a hand. Trained in the system standard method, they came completely equipped, completely prepared to take over wherever there was trouble to be cleared, and asking only where to go. Throughout the desolated countryside they scattered, literally looking for trouble and ready to battle it. Certainly, it was an arresting and reassuring sight as these visitors from distant parts appeared on the New England scene and joined the fleets of local trucks and cars whose crews had already accomplished so much. More than 7,000 trained and skillful men united in the task of physical restoration, working from dawn to dark, 7 days a week. Men of more than 20 states have appeared in these picture sequences, all working with a common objective, the restoration of telephone service. And here are scenes that tell of still other men, the men of the Bell system, service and supply, who fought in the same battle and with the same objective. Without their unconquerable spirit, the fast-moving and sustained effort to restore service would have had to falter. Staggering quantities of supplies were required to keep at work the hundreds of telephone crews that toiled amid the wreckage of the storm. But the Western Electric Organization, geared to just such an emergency and working 24 hours a day at feverish speed, saw to it that the telephone army never need slow up in its restoration task. The stirring scenes of activity at the great warehouses in Brooklyn, New Haven, Boston were matched by equally stirring scenes in the New Jersey, Maryland, and Illinois factories. New records were established in the manufacture and distribution of wire and cable, of a veritable multitude of supply items. Make no mistake about it, these men of Western Electric had their challenge too, and superbly it was met. And so we close this picture record of tragedy, of challenge, of accomplishment. It is a record of restoration alone, for the accomplishment at congested switchboards in those challenging days is another story, and a moving one. With lines restored and telephones alive again, their guardians return to routine or rebuilding jobs, and visitors from other states roll south and west to waiting homes. Scars on nature's face will long remain once past. But longer yet will stay the memory of how the storm was fought by those who gave their strength and courage to help society reconstruct its life. From all who watched police and firemen, rescue workers, public officials, militia, keeping the faith through days and nights of sacrifice and struggle, rose a swelling chorus. Thanks, and thanks again. For all who saw the lights again glowing in their homes, power restored to idle machines, trains moving once more on the all-clear signal. It will ever be a memory of public service at its peak. And in this grateful recognition, there is no warmer, heartier cheer than that of the telephone men from near and from far, who saw it all, who understand, who know. I thank you.